Welcome to the Psychotherapy Central podcast, where we discuss love, attachment, and healing from trauma. A place where you can gain the knowledge, tools, and wisdom to help you build secure, flourishing relationships. I'm your host, clinical psychotherapist and couples therapist, Jennifer Nurick. Hello and welcome everyone. Today we have a very special guest on, someone who is very close to my heart. This is Sue McDonnell. She's a psychotherapist, an executive coach and team developer. She works with executive teams and senior leaders to bring about change, self-awareness, and dialogues that matter. And she is one of the reasons that I did my master's in psychotherapy. So welcome on today, Sue.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. It's so lovely to be here with you.
It's really lovely to kind of land here with you as well. So I have a lot of questions about what you do, because some of it I kind of know, and then some of it I have no idea. So yeah, I would love to know what you do in that space with leadership and executive leadership.
Well, first of all, that makes two of us. Sometimes I have no idea what I'm doing. So look, I think I work really with executives to help them to develop self-awareness through a variety of different methods that I use. And I work with one exec team a year as well, which is more in the dynamic of the system. So what's happening apart from the individual and what's creating the patterns that are emerging in the team, and how do we work with that to bring about the best possible results for the organization, and in that hopefully help leaders to become a little more conscious of their impact and how they show up in the world.
Mm-hmm. And do you find that one leader can have a very big impact on the kind of the hierarchy and people kind of working under them?
Yeah, so excuse me, we talk about the concept of leadership shadow, which is, are you aware as an individual of how you're impacting others through your thoughts, words, deeds, and nonverbals? And absolutely, what a leader says and does is extremely important. Do they do what they say they're going to do? Are they high in integrity? Do they work above the line or below the line? So what we mean by that is, are they in victim or blame consciousness or judgment, or are they, willing to really own their problems and their issues and have the honest conversations, which is actually a very difficult thing for a lot of people to do.
Mm-hmm. What's the difference between executive coaching and psychotherapy?
Yeah, I'm not sure I know, because I think sometimes I mix it up a bit, given I'm a psychotherapist as well. So I think there's a few things that would stand out for me as differences that I try to maintain boundaries around. Firstly, executive coaching is really focused on getting outcomes. So it's quite, it's much more challenging than psychotherapy, in the sense that, at least when I was practicing just psychotherapy, I would bring in some gentle challenge and some questions and some opportunities for self-awareness. When you're being paid the money that executive coaches get paid, I suppose the expectation of the client, and my expectation, is that you're really challenging them at a deeper level. And so you set some really clear frameworks and goals up front. And I'm not really into goals as in, let's get 10% ROI. That's not really what I mean by a goal. But a goal in this context might be, I really want to develop deeper self-awareness, and I'm willing to get feedback from 15 people to see how that's going, Mm-hmm. And so it's good for people, particularly people who are rational left brain people, to have something to track back to measure progress. And also from an organizational perspective, because they're paying me, they're my client. So I have to be able to sort of talk about where the client is making progress and not. So usually, the other thing I'd say that's different is, usually in the context of executive coaching, you bring in some third parties into the relationship. So you bring in stakeholders that matter to the individual. If you're doing one-on-one coaching, you might bring in board members, you might bring in shareholders. It depends. You might bring in somebody's husband or wife or partner.
Wow.
And with that, you sort of get a 360 view of how someone's showing up, because often it can be my point of view and the individual's point of view, and actually we're not really getting to the heart of how they're showing up and how other people are seeing them and what's the impact they're having on others. So it's quite a courageous journey to take, really. And yeah, and the other thing I'd say is we usually have a tripartite relationship, which is we ask the client, again, I'm talking about one-on-one coaching, to identify someone as a sponsor. And so it might be the board member, or if it's a CEO, or it might be a CEO if it's an executive general manager. And then we have tripartite meetings where we talk about the coaching, and we talk about what's shifting and what's not. And we talk about the support that the CEO can provide the individual, or the board member can. And I think what's beautiful about that is that it increases the accountability, first of all, but secondly, it means that I don't feel so alone, and neither does the client, because they've got this internal radar. Because obviously I'm outside the system, and that's useful and sometimes not so useful. So it's good to have someone inside the system who can really help us to progress on the changes the individual and the organisation wants to make. The final thing I'd say is, when I started coaching 26 years ago, it was very much based on performance. And so there was a lot of stigma when I started about, oh, am I not good enough? Like, why am I getting coaching? And now what we see is, really, to be honest, I only work with high performers. I only work with people that are really interested in doing the work. And so I usually meet people for what we call a chemistry session first. So that's complimentary. And I usually spend some time with them just to talk about my style, how I show up in the world, what's important to them. And then we see if there's a match. And sometimes there is, and sometimes there isn't, from both parties. So I'm totally cool with that, because I always get the clients I need and want, and I'm very grateful for that. And that's made my life very free from a work perspective, because I don't feel any obligation around that.
So I have a curiosity around the bringing in someone from higher up in the organization, and I have, I guess, a systems perspective on that. And I'm wondering about sort of family overlay, that as you bring in that almost like an elder, an overlay of almost like the father figure or a parental kind of figure. And I have, I guess, a curiosity about, I wonder how that plays out sometimes, in terms of sometimes being helpful and maybe sometimes not being so helpful.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, as you would know from your own work, first of all, there's so many projections happening in the coach-coachee relationship. So often I represent somebody's mother or father in terms of how I show up. So I feel like everything is karmic. Like, the clients that I get are, like, sometimes I'm a baby step ahead of them in terms of what I'm working on in my own life, or sometimes it's something reflected in my own life. So that's one aspect of that sort of family systems overlay. I think with the CEO or the board member, what I'd say is that dynamic is there already. So actually what we want to do as coaches is we want to shed some light on that dynamic, and we want to use language that's acceptable to the client, right? So in that scenario, I probably wouldn't use father, mother, family, but I might say something like, when you think of the conflict that's happening in this situation, how you show up in that conflict, what does it remind you of? Or I might say to the sort of senior, the CEO, when you look at John, what do you see? And what do you think is really positive about your relationship, and how can we sort of strengthen that? So we talk in those terms. So it's a little more, I suppose, palatable. But to be honest, as I get older, now I just turned 54 on Monday, and I'm a bit like, do you know what? I'm a bit more free in terms of, I don't know, I think I talk more about things that I wouldn't have talked about maybe 10 years ago. Because when you establish trust with somebody, you can probably bring in things like, what was it like for you at school when you didn't get all A's in your report and your father said X, and how might that be showing up in you not getting that return on investment in this project, and what are the similarities and the parallels, and that can be helpful for people because it's like a thread, throughout their life, past, present, and future. And what I always say to people is when they find out I'm a psychotherapist, sometimes they get a bit scared, and I go, look, I promise I'm not going to have you in a fetal position crying in the corner, but it is actually really helpful to look at how your past colors your present, and how actually it's very empowering to know you can make different choices. So one simple example would be, I've just finished working with a woman who was totally inspirational. Really has done much more work on herself than most of my clients. And she spent 8 hours one day on her beliefs, as an example. And she just worked through everything, and she wanted to create this amazing role. And she was headhunted into the role, and she started this month, and she's going to be quite a public, prominent figure. And it's been such a joy to see her make those threads herself between, I won't say too much about her because I don't want to identify her, but her mum was quite a prominent figure in society, and the impact that had on her, and how she can make different choices now around her career, and what is going to serve her as a human being versus what messages is she still trying to please her mother with, as an example. So she's found the process incredibly empowering to let go of some of the beliefs that no longer serve her.
And as you're working with people around their beliefs, are there sort of particular tools that you're giving people to kind of work with that? Or
yeah, absolutely. So I work with I work with a lot of different tools, to be honest, and I work very intuitively. So I never use the same process with anyone. I think, and I spend a lot of time reflecting on my clients and thinking about what might work for them. So it depends if someone is visual, it depends how deep someone wants to go. It depends how open people are. Sometimes I'll bring in a spiritual lens, sometimes I'll bring in a very rational lens, sometimes I'll bring in a system lens. So it depends on where the client is at, what tools might be best for them in any particular scenario.
Yeah. And that's that lovely attunement, which in itself can be kind of a missing experience for so many people, actually being attuned to, not only by a therapist, but actually by a coach as well, like really sensing into what's the right pitch and the right frequency for this person to affect the biggest change.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as you would know, attuning to self is so important as well. And I think as someone who's been quite other oriented all my life, that's been one of my biggest learnings, to really attune to what's going on for me, and how can I use that in service of the client where appropriate. So I noticed a situation last week where I was really triggered in a session, and I really hate that word triggered, actually, it's so overused, but anyway. And I paused and sort of breathed into it and thought, is it helpful to use this or not in service of the client, or is this my stuff? And actually in that moment, I decided to share a little to see what the response would be like. And it turned out that was similar feedback that one of their direct reports had given them. So that attuning to self is very important, because if I'd just been triggered and kind of just held up a mirror without sort of really checking in and going, hang on, is this my stuff? Is it helpful to the client? Is it kind? Can I say something in a challenging but compassionate way? And that can really help the process move along as well. And it can actually build deeper trust and intimacy, because the client, Thomas Hubel, who was one of my supervisors for quite a while, this beautiful man, has this beautiful expression, which is, I'm feeling you, feeling me. And, that's such, I really experienced that when working with him. And sometimes my clients say to me, oh my God, Sue, there's nowhere to hide with you. And I'm aware sometimes, like I have quite strong eye contact. So sometimes I have to just break it or, yeah, but I feel deeply invested actually in everyone I work with. Makes me emotional for some weird reason, but yeah, I do. I feel deeply invested. And yeah, I very much care about my clients,
I think that's what leads so many people into psychotherapy and different kinds of personal development and self-development, is that genuine care and heart energy, the heart flow. Yeah. So what's helped you, because you're clearly very good at holding space for people and creating a safe space, even for people who I'm imagining are quite big personalities sometimes. And so what work has really helped you with holding that space?
I think having a brilliant supervisor is critical. So my supervisor is Eric Dehaan, and he's a Dutch man. He's challenging, and he's also compassionate. And so I love when he challenges me on my stuff and how I'm showing up. I have a few very trusted peers who I just adore, who I couldn't live without. I think, I want to be mindful how I say this because I think there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom, but I've learned a lot. Like I've done a lot of work on myself in terms of different courses, different models, different therapies. And the reason for that is because I want to be consistently learning and I want to be challenging myself, and I want to be shown in the best possible way I can for my clients. Plus, like I'm a bit obsessive. Like I love all this work, But it's funny, like I'm studying essential oils at the moment, and I was saying to my best friend the other day, it's actually really lovely to study something that's non-people related, that has a bit of science to it, and yet I find now, like before we started this call, like I put my essential oils on because I'm like, oh, that'd be nice. So I also think just to say like the ambience we create for ourselves and the ambience we create for our clients. Sorry, I know I'm going a bit off point here, but is important. So I think if I wrap it up, I'd say having a great supervisor, having some peers, doing some self-reflection. I do it every week. I do a range of things, like I do acupuncture, I do kinesiology. I take herbs, different herbs, depending on what's going on. A lot of exercise. I think that plus the courses, plus the continual learning, there's kind of a range of things that I do. And I feel very lucky to be able to do that. This year has been a bit more protracted just because of some personal things going on. So I haven't been able to do as much. And actually, I found that my work is deeper.
Yeah, I've noticed for myself, and maybe it's similar, that it's a bit like waves coming into the beach. So there's some seasons where there's sort of very intense learning and intense self-reflection. And then there's periods where there's almost like a respite, or an integration might be a better word. And then it kind of goes back out again. I find that there's a bit of a flow like that. So I've learned not to kind of panic when there's a sort of an integration phase, and not to panic too much when it feels quite intense in terms of the learning. Is it like that for you a bit?
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful description. And I think what I'm learning now is to trust myself a bit more. I think when I was younger, because as you said, I was working with like a lot of big personalities and a lot of very senior people, I felt I had to prove myself, and I felt that confidence was very important. And now as I come more into I don't know, I think menopause has been very transformational for me, and really trusting and backing myself. And in fact, I had feedback from a client last week that was really helpful. where he said to me, I'm working with an executive team at the moment, and he's the CFO, and he said to me, Sue, we're paying you for your presence and your ability to help us have better dialogue and your ability to really challenge what's happening in the room and to lift us up. And he said, I don't think I've met anyone that's done that better than you. And I've been in a number of team coaching interventions in my career. And he said, but I also want to say that there's a part of you when you turn to your PowerPoint slide to talk about some person in Harvard that said X, Y, and Z, I feel like we lose you. I feel like you go somewhere else and it's like you disconnect. And it's very sort of tricky. I can't remember his exact words, but that was such helpful feedback for me, because I realized there is still a part of me that wants to impress and that wants people in the room to know that I'm not woo-woo, because I've always been made fun of for being the feelings chick. And so I've always got this rational lens going, oh, well, I need to prove this through data,
Yeah.
And it's so helpful. I mean, for a CFO who obviously numbers are his baby, to say something like that to me was hugely impactful. Like, it actually made me very emotional that he would, first of all, care enough to give me that feedback. But secondly, I felt so seen, and it's not often you feel seen in a corporate setting. So it's very powerful feedback for me to think about, how do I use data to help the few people in the room who I know who are skeptical and yet not lose myself in that?
What I'm struck by in that example is I've just been doing a series of posts on Instagram about self-awareness, and the internal self-awareness and the external self-awareness, and the external self-awareness piece being around receiving feedback. And just what a wonderful example that is of receiving external feedback and it being really valuable, because sometimes it's that piece in your hurry window where other people can see it so clearly, but sometimes we don't see it at all. And it can be, if it's delivered in the right way with compassion and understanding and not so much judgment, if it's delivered in the right way, it can be very helpful to receive that.
100%. And I think what I loved about that particular piece of feedback was I realized how much time I spend framing my feedback. And there was very little framing. It was quite direct feedback, but it was done with care. And I also learned something from that. Because often I'll ask permission and I will be tentative to begin with, because I think I've always been very challenging with my feedback. So I've had to learn a lot about compassion. And now that I feel I'm gaining more of that towards myself and towards others, I do tend to be more tentative. But I noticed in his direct feedback with me, it was incredibly helpful because it was very clear. And I think, clear and kind are kind of the two beautiful ways to give and receive feedback, if you can. And of course, let's be honest, it's easier said than done if you're not, when I'm in the middle of a heated debate, that's a bit different, right? But this was I'm just very grateful for that moment.
Yeah. So your 3 tips for anyone who's listening who has feedback that they would love to give somebody in their life: clear, kind, and being mindful of the situation. So choosing a time when both people are regulated, maybe it's in private. Any other tips that you would give around offering feedback to someone?
Yeah, I think curiosity is really important, because often my perception of things can be different to what the other person intended. And I think there's a beautiful expression that says, we judge other people by their behavior and we judge ourselves by our intentions. And I think that's so true, right? Like, how can I really step into the shoes of someone and go, well, what was their intention? I had a very difficult personal situation recently, and it took me everything within me to really step into that person's shoes and go, what might have been going on for them? How can I see things from their perspective? And because it's very healing. It's very healing when, as human beings, we can have a difficult conversation and work through it. And I think there's so much now, particularly some of the young people I work with, talk about, cancel culture and so much fear about saying and doing the wrong thing with all this PC and woke stuff. And I just go, do you know what? Like, we're losing the ability to have that humanity, which is we can have a debate and we can disagree. I can give you feedback. You don't have to take it on board. It's my perspective and it's my perception. But I think we have to be careful when we're giving feedback to not need to be right, actually. And I think the worst thing you can say to someone is, can I give you some feedback? Because it's, in terms of the limbic brain, it's a bit like walking down a dark alleyway and hearing footsteps at night, right? So it's like, I think the languaging is very important. And to be really blunt about it, I'm very concerned that there's people that are doing weekend courses in trauma or weekend courses in coaching and thinking that they have the tools to be able to do things like this. And actually, human beings are very complex. And actually, we need to have a lot of respect, self-respect and respect for others. And deep curiosity takes a very long time to cultivate.
Yeah, because often, to use kind of a parts framework, we often have parts that will come in and might get defensive or have very strong dialogue going on about something in particular. And so to kind of unblend from the parts and come into a place that's more heart-centered can take a lot of self-awareness, that internal self-awareness, which I think was where one of the places where psychotherapy can be very helpful, or has really helped me.
Oh, so true, so true. And I think sometimes, sometimes what I find challenging is sometimes clients will say to me, I don't really care about this person though, like my peer or my co-worker. And that's tricky, right? Because, excuse me, I think there has to be an element of care at work. And it's not that they don't care about the outcome, it's that they maybe don't like the person. So then they find it difficult to care for the person. And I think that's when things become tricky with feedback as well, is when a lot of difference emerges. How do we navigate difference? How do we navigate complexity as human beings? And I don't think we're very skilled at that. I don't. And, I've got a lot of learning there to do myself.
And that I don't care piece really reminds me of there's a resonance there for me around kind of blocking parts, that sometimes when we have parts of us that just don't know what to do with that person, just kind of, I don't care about them, I'm just going to kind of block them out or ignore them, or
Right.
I'm aware that sometimes that can happen in my system. I have to be careful of it because my family has patterns of cutoff. And so sometimes instead of kind of dealing with what's going on, there'll be a part of me that I don't care about that person. And that can be a protective device.
For sure. Whereas my family is the exact opposite. My family is anxious to the point of being overly involved. And what that can mean is that then I want to withdraw because it feels too intrusive. Because the anxiety in us wants to resolve the conflict. And so that's probably why you and I get on so well, because we, you know what I mean? We kind of have fun.
We have the opposite polarity. Yeah.
So you don't trigger me, you know what I mean? Because it's just easy between us. That's my experience anyway. What's yours?
Yeah, same. Yeah, it's easy. And you have given me feedback a few times and I've really valued it and appreciated it.
And same, right? Same. I mean, Jen was my one of my teachers when I did my energy healing program. And so, there were plenty of opportunities to give me feedback there. And so I think Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
No, I think we developed a deep trust and a love for each other. And yeah, I love how you show up in the world.
Mm, thank
And I
you.
love the impact you've had on me.
Mm,
Mm.
yeah. For me, having sisters walking similar paths has been very important, especially when we've had big things happening kind of globally and personally. And so, yeah, I really value those relationships. Yeah. And I know that you know that you're one of those. Yeah. So, getting back into kind of the topic a bit, what do you feel is important when you're working with exec teams in terms of transformation?
Well, there's quite a lot. I think there's understanding the context strategically. So before I work with an exec team, I would always spend quite a bit of time with the CEO. I would always spend quite a bit of time reviewing their strategy and where the goals of the organization. I would spend some time reviewing the reputational risks, what's happened, what's happening externally, what's in the news about them, what's the financial review saying about them as an organization, what are the competitors doing, so all of that kind of context piece is really important for many reasons. And then I start to get into what is the appetite of the team for actually doing this work, and what does it even look like, and where do they want to get to? So, one of the things that's really helpful for an exec team to do is to pull together on a collective purpose. And so what that means is really a lot of team members will come into a situation and be representing their functional area.
Yeah.
And talk about their numbers, their business. And they're very responsible and conscientious in terms of their business and their direct reports. But to come into an exec team and talk about what's actually happening at the executive team level and what do we collectively need to work on as a team to advance this organization can be very difficult for people to make that transition from a functional area into a collective piece. So because there's a lot of competition for resources, as one example of something that can get in the way of collective piece. So you have to do a lot of mindset work with people, really, to help them to shift and to see the possibilities of what could happen if we X, Y, Z. And really, that's where a lot of the coaching happens, where there's a lot of curiosity around, like talking to each of them about, well, where are we? Where are you as a team? And where could you be and what would that mean? So I think what's really important to address is the diversity in the team, the diversity in terms of diversity of thought. There's always a lot of diversity of thinking. The diversity in terms of what's important for different people sitting around the table. The diversity in terms of what are our stakeholders seeking from us, what are our shareholders needing. More and more sustainability and community impact is coming in as really important pieces. How do we do that authentically rather than a marketing exercise? How do we actually really kind of lean into that and think about, what's in our heart about that? So I often work with metaphors, and I often work with dreams and visions and what's important for this legacy. What's the legacy this team want to leave behind? Not from an egoic perspective, but more from a leadership shadow perspective. And also, then the tough conversations really happen one-on-one to begin with. So you do a lot of work as a collective, and then the way that I work anyway is I do one-on-one sessions in between to say, hey, Jen, what I noticed in that session, you showed up in this way. Can you talk to me? What's going on for you? And how come you looked at Sue the whole time you were talking, as opposed to kind of tell me about that. What's your relationship like with the CEO? Where does he or she support you or get in your way? And then I always give them homework, which can be a bit challenging for some people. But I think what I often find is like real change happens between the sessions. So maybe they have a bit of an aha moment, whatever, and maybe they come back to the next team session and they show up very differently. Look, I've had some really crazy things happen in team sessions that one day I will write a book about, like really unbelievable stuff where my heart has been going, oh my God, I have no idea what to do now. And I'm talking about, like, I don't think you would believe me if I told you some of the things that has happened. But more and more I feel grounded in those moments. And it actually shows the shift people are willing to make with the courageous interpersonal risks they take. I think what I find difficult is sometimes people then, when they really do this work, right, and they really commit to it, they can sometimes have more intimacy at work than they do at home.
Yeah.
And I had a CEO say to me recently, like, I don't know what I'm going to do because my marriage isn't where it needs to be. And so then there's calibration around that and integration, and how do we not become better than or think we're better than our partners just because we're doing a little bit of work on ourselves, and like you said about that wave of development, I think it's similar with relationships. Sometimes I'm going to be a bit more developed, sometimes the other person is. How do we find compassion and peace and love with that as well?
What was your guidance for the person where they were noticing some things in their marriage?
Well, a few things. Firstly, because we were working on his compassion, I asked him, what would that be like for you if we were to look at X through a compassionate lens? What would you be saying differently? And B, how could you gently share with your partner what's going on for you, not in a critical way, but in a way of using, as you said earlier, that mindfulness, that curiosity, that kindness to sit down and go, hey, look, I notice we're not talking as much as we used to. What's going on for you? So that curiosity. But actually, where we ended up in that conversation, well, it was a few conversations later, was that person ended up in marriage therapy. And I helped them find somebody because it wasn't in this vicinity. And then I worked with the marriage therapist as well, which would be unusual. It would be an unusual combination, but there were reasons for that, which I won't go into today, but it was very purposeful, and actually it was a very successful outcome.
And that's a great example. Yeah, I mean, interdisciplinary scaffolding can be incredibly helpful. So I love that you would be, that feels almost like a step above and beyond to support your clients and the teams in every area. So to me, that feels like that extra holding and your willingness to go above and beyond to give what you sense intuitively is needed. And you were right, because the outcome was good.
Yeah, in this case, I haven't always been that fortunate, right? So I think life can be tricky for people who are at least this is my experience, for people who are incredibly ambitious and are socialized into thinking that when I achieve X, Y, and Z, my life will be A, B, and C. And often that doesn't compute. And often I work with people who are in their late 40s, early 50s, who have everything that people would think is successful. And yet they're not fulfilled.
I reposted something from the co-founder of, I think it was Netflix. And he said that throughout his 40-year marriage or something, that every Tuesday night, no matter what the issues were at work, that him and his wife at 5 o'clock, they went out for a date night every single Tuesday at 5 o'clock. And everybody in the organization knew, and that he made a conscious decision. I don't want to have done 7 startups and beyond my 7th marriage. And he said that the biggest achievement was that not the success of the company that he created, but actually was that I've stayed in the same marriage and I've cultivated it and nurtured it. You know, every Tuesday it got space, it got time, and raised children through that marriage. And the last line of the post was like, that's my biggest success.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, what beautiful consciousness to role model to your employees as well, right? To say this is actually what's important, this is what success is, and yet it sounds like he's had both, because one often feeds into the other, as you know.
Yeah, and that ability to hold both and not be pulled by the whatever the drives are underneath for that. These are the things that I must achieve at whatever cost.
Right.
Holding the importance of, actually, for me, my family is really important, and my relationships and connections outside of work are really important. And how do I give some of my life force to that as well? Because work can often take up so much energy, time, and mind space. And ultimately that's life force, isn't it? How do I try and, when we're at work, often it's not even 9 to 5 for most people. It's like 7 till 8 o'clock at night, and sometimes answering emails at 12 o'clock at night. And so there's lots more life force going here. And how do I keep rebalancing that to align with my values and what's going to be important to me when I'm 55, 65, 75?
Absolutely. And I don't know who said this, you'll know more about it than I will, but I know some marriage therapist said, if you're lucky enough to sort of stay with the same person, you probably have 7 or 8 different marriages anyway, because, you grow with an individual, hopefully, right? If you commit the time and the resources and the love necessary.
That's so true. And I'm giggling about that because my husband and I have got this joke. So we're 18 years married, but I've known him now for more than half my life. And we've been joking that we are on our 2nd marriage, because there has been a definite felt shift for both of us that when our both of our kids became teenagers, there was this sudden shift in our marriage and an opening up and more freedom. And so we've been calling each other, we keep talking about, this marriage is so much easier than the first one. I'm loving it. With more resources, free time. Our kids are less hard work. And we're like, I love this marriage. This marriage is brilliant. So I think
that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And Esther Perel said that as well, right? In terms of like, I used it with that guy actually that I was telling you about earlier, where, I can't remember the exact words, but she said something like, when you're in that place of between first and second marriage, like it's almost like a conversation around, we've reached the end of this relationship, are we ready to sort of lean into the next one, And that, to be honest, that's been one of the hardest things in my life. I always thought, when I was younger, that I would have a very long-lasting marriage and kids, and that hasn't happened for me. And I think that's where karma comes in as well, where you go, that's really interesting. I've had a lot of relationships and a lot of long-term relationships, and I've learned a huge amount. And I've definitely grown through relationships, and I love intimacy and men and relationships. But it's been a sadness for me that hasn't transpired the way that I would have assumed that it would. And I remember one of my friends saying to me recently, "But Sue, like, you're a mum to so many people, And I'm like, yeah, I know, but it's not how I imagined it would be. And I think that can be sometimes helpful in my work. Not that I talk about it with clients, I don't, but it can be helpful in my work when I see people who are unfulfilled in a certain area of their lives, because there's parts of my life that I feel unfulfilled in, and there's kind of a rawness and an authenticity with that to go on. My life is not perfect, because some clients, and I'm sure you've experienced this, can put you up on a bit of a pedestal, like you're the all knowing, all, you know, and I'm like, no, I'm not like that. Like, so many things in my life that, you know, that I'm working on. And I think that can be helpful for clients to experience um, a vulnerability when they see your vulnerability, you know? So I love what you said about your marriage as well, because it tells a story, and it weaves a journey of what you've been through to get to that second marriage, which is really beautiful.
Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. There's that common humanity part, that about the putting on a pedestal, and there's that kind of common humanity of most things that a lot of clients feel when we've had a rich life with which has involved going right down into the depths and up into the joy realms, and we've really kind of surfed both of those.
Yes.
And often pull on different parts and different experiences of life as a tuning fork to resonate with what's going on for people. And so the flavor or the context might be different, but often there's there's a resonance of, I experienced that when I was about 6, or that flavor. Yeah. And I guess bringing that into what I'm thinking about is sort of bringing that into session and allowing to be a tuning fork, and allowing, there to be vulnerability and sharing of that common human. Sometimes being human is really, really hard. Yeah.
It is. It is. And I think I really think it's a shame that we're not taught more about how to handle difficulty in our lives when we're younger.
Mm.
And I know some things have shifted, you know, in the schools with mindfulness, and, you know, it's a little more accessible, but I still don't think we're doing enough in terms of things that are important, like, you know, like being respectful of the land, being respectful of each other, learning how to navigate conflict, learning how to navigate uncertainty. Even if I think about the corporate world in terms of cycles, like I was thinking about this the other day, you know, the corporate world is based on a man's hormonal cycle, which is 24 hours. And as we know, a woman's cycle is every 28 days. So often I see women that are stressed out to the max. And when we actually really dig into it, it's because they're acting in a way that's not serving their system. You know, it's like, I'm sure people will identify with, you know, you might sign up for a marathon feeling all gung-ho, and then 2 weeks later go, what the hell do I do that for? Because you're in a different phase of your cycle. So I think bringing that femininity back into the workplace and learning how to really bring the feminine and the masculine within each of us into the workplace, and having more freedom in the types of conversations we're having and how we show up in the world, and having the language and the tools to be able to navigate that is so critical, actually. And I think, you know, we're only getting to a point now where we're talking about heart-centered leadership and leader as healer. And I mean, geez, like sometimes I think we're unevolving. You know, like if we look at it, the ancient cultures, they were so far ahead of us, you know, in terms of their wisdom. And we've lost that through rationality and valuing science, and not valuing the heart and the intuition and everything that can come from not the mind.
Mm. Yeah. And as you speak about this, I'm really aware also of, although hormonally men are more flatlined, that they're also going through cycles, that men will go through cycles of depression and
Of
might have
course.
the loss of a parent that might bring up a lot of kind of deep grief, and that there's almost sort of cycles within cycles, that women are going through that 28-day cycle kind of as a small regular cycle. But then also, men and women are going through these really broad kind of almost like that wave coming in and out again. They might go through big waves of feeling very disconnected in their partnerships, or very isolated or alone, or just that kind of cycles within cycles. And that, I guess what's coming up for me as I speak is that deep compassion for everybody who's in those systems, trying to do the best that they can with what they've got in the environment that they are, whilst honoring that it is a human being and not a robot that is doing those things, and how to
Right.
manage the personal within the professional context.
Right. I think that's beautiful. And I think, what comes up in me as you talk about that is really the theme of loneliness, and how often I feel that I serve a purpose for people's loneliness.
Yeah. Yes.
And how do we as humans deal with that? I mean, there's more people living in apartments than ever before. As you would know, the online world is crazy. Um, I'll give you a simple example from my own life. I woke up this morning to 24 WhatsApp voice messages.
Wow.
And I felt totally overwhelmed. I was like, I can't do it. And there's something very hard for me in that, because I love people, I love being connected, but that for me feels very disconnected.
Mm.
It's like for me the nervous system of Sydney is very achievement oriented, and it's about doing, and it's about achieving a lot of the time. And I think it's a very difficult balance to get right, because it's a very expensive city to live in. And I think there's a huge amount of pressure on people, so we don't have time. And, I don't know if you know Priya Parker's work around gatherings, but she's done some beautiful work around gatherings. And one of the guys who works with that work was asking me recently about Irish people, because we would do, a funeral as a gathering, and we're very good at spending time with people around death. Death is a very familiar place for Irish people, and well, for a lot of Irish people, I should say, sorry. And I feel like we don't do enough gatherings as humans, and there's something really beautiful in the community aspect of that. And I think that's what I loved about where we met, was that community was very important. And one of the antidotes to loneliness is community. And how do we create more community when we're living more online and, more on our devices? I mean, they are very addictive. Like I looked around, I was on a train the other day, first time in a long time. And I swear, like, that line from George Orwell's 1984 stuck with me, which is, I think it was something like, they will look up from their screens. Every single person was on their phone. And so we're missing so many opportunities for connection.
Absolutely.
And I wonder what that was like in your work. I'm sure you're seeing a lot of that with what you're dealing with.
Loneliness and interpersonal issues. So how do we resolve conflict? I think that there is a really big missing piece for a lot of people in how do I have vulnerable conversations where it might hurt the other person, or to have those kinds of vulnerable conversations in intimate relationships. Yeah, I see a lot of that. How do I put boundaries in place in a way that's respectful to me and honoring of the other person? Yeah, but yeah, loneliness it's a big part of it. I saw a lot of it obviously during COVID. Yeah, a lot of deep loneliness. There's a great book, Johann Hari's Lost Connection, that talks about depression and different aspects of that cultural piece around loneliness and isolation that I found very helpful in putting depression into a much bigger context than a medical model. Yeah.
Yeah, and I haven't read that book, so thanks, I'll check it out. But I love his work on addiction as well.
Mm. Yeah.
And I love how he talks about addiction being, around the loss of connection. And I think about someone in my life I know who suffers from an addiction that is not as socially acceptable as, say, alcohol, and how he's actually a very sensitive soul who I always think he's a real healer, actually. And he doesn't know how to channel those beautiful qualities into a way that could protect him a little bit from himself almost, and his sensitivity about what he picks up from others, and therefore becomes even lonelier. And so I think we have a lot of work to do. I really do. We have a lot of work to do as humanity. And I am worried about the impact of AI. And I know there's so many amazing things that can be done with AI. And I'm also aware that we need to have really emotionally intelligent people dealing with these complex problems who know when enough is enough and when to bring in humanity. Like, I don't know if you saw that. Like, I tried it actually last week just to see. Do you know what I'm going to say? The parts. There's actually like AI therapists in IFS.
Okay.
So I went in and like did a session with 3 different therapists just to see what my experience was like. And actually it was fascinating, really fascinating on many levels. But what I felt leaving was they said all the right things, but I didn't feel it in my heart,
Yeah, because there's that human connection, and part of the healing experience in IFS, it's internal family systems for people who don't know what that is. It's a modality in psychotherapy, is that so much trauma and hurt happens in relationship that there's something I think that is fundamental to the healing process about being in relationship while those really hurt parts are witnessed and felt and seen, that there is another resonant nervous system that is really holding space and being with and holding the hand of the part that got really hurt.
Yeah, I love that. That's so beautiful. And I think what I see people often talk about is, and I talk about it myself, just to be clear, but this concept of self-care and boundaries and all that. And what I'm a little bit concerned about there is we're creating potentially a narcissistic, culture, which is, all about me and my boundaries, and I can't hold space for that because, I'm not in a place where I can, etc. Rather than thinking about that piece that you beautifully raise about co-regulation, like how can we co-regulate with another human being, and how do we can still put boundaries in place and care for ourselves within that. But there's a collective care. I wrote a blog on it recently. There's collective care that's required in our society to evolve, I think. And yeah, we're becoming a little more individualist and in some areas. And so how do we come back to that co-regulation, that collective care? And I definitely think something shifted within COVID, Jen. Like, I really do. I feel like something massive has changed. And I feel like, without being too dramatic, we're almost in PTSD. We're still rising out of that forced lockdown, forced isolation, and forced division that was created in humanity. And how do we emerge from that more whole rather than more broken.
Mm.
And I know for me, I've had to do a lot of work around it due to my own personal circumstances and the impact on me personally, and how do I come back into society believing and trusting and being willing to be open again.
Mm. So if there was a sort of a final kind of piece that you would like to leave us with in terms of leadership and consciousness and connection, because that's kind of where the theme is heading. Yeah, any kind of final thoughts?
Just that, I think when you're in a leadership position, whether you're a parent, whether you're a sister, brother, guardian of an animal, more formal leadership roles within organizations and so on and so forth. I think there's an opportunity for us all to really have honest conversations with ourselves and go, am I being the type of leader I would like to be? And am I treating other people the way that I'd like to be treated? And is there some work for me to do to become not better, because I don't really like that sort of comparison, but is there work for me to do to become more of the type of leader I'd like to be, whether that's peeling back a few more layers of my vulnerability, whether that's leaning into, as you say, difficult conversation and learning the skills around that, whether it's managing high stakes conversation with a stakeholder. How do leaders sit down and do some self-reflection around their impact and how they're showing up in the world? And if they don't know how to do that, how can they gain the help of someone like yourself or myself that can walk with them on that journey to help them to do that? And it's been the privilege of my lifetime to be able to do that work. I feel extraordinarily blessed and beyond grateful that people have trusted me with their deepest, darkest secrets. And I hold that very sacredly, actually. I think it's very sacred work to do, work on yourself in the context of community, in the context of evolving the world, and in the context of becoming more wise.
Yeah. And so for people who are listening to this, I know there'll be some who are thinking, I want to meet this person, I want to bring her into our organization, this is exactly what we need. Where will they find you?
Well, my website is suemcdonald.com.au, and I tend to post on LinkedIn mainly. So you can find me on LinkedIn under Sue McDonald.
Thank you so much for being here, and felt like there was a lot of richness in that discussion and about leadership, overlay with family systems, self-awareness within, awareness between. And I feel like, I really appreciate your sharing of your experiences personally, but also working in a very delicate space with big personalities. Yeah. So thank you so much for everything you shared.
Jen, thank you so much for being so gracious as a host and asking some really beautiful questions and holding space for me and joining in and adding your profound wisdom. That's really valued by myself and so many people. We're so grateful for you and your work in the world and who you are.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. We'll connect soon. And thank you for listening, everyone who's been listening. Over and out. Thank you for joining me on this episode. If you want to learn more about all things love, attachment, and trauma, I'd love to connect with you on Instagram at psychotherapy.central or visit my website at psychotherapycentral.health. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd greatly appreciate it if you could leave a review and a 5-star rating. Your support means a lot, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon.